fiancé and I were on a camping trip last summer in Arkansas. We were casually grilling some dinner when we heard someone loudly yelling for help. I ran a few campsites over to find a clearly drunk man standing in a pool of his own blood. Apparently, he had dropped his knife and nicked an artery in his ankle, which was spurting blood like a fountain. My fiancé was not far behind me and helped get wrapped up and elevated. While he did that, I ran back for my phone to call for an ambulance, only to find out I had no cell service. I knew there was a hospital roughly 20 miles away, so I made a judgment call and loaded the man up into his truck and took off. Now is a good time to mention that blood makes me super squeamish. I think pure adrenaline is the only thing that kept me from passing out at the wheel. I made it to the hospital in 12 minutes, just as he started slurring his speech and hinting at losing consciousness. I still remember the pool of blood spilling out of the door onto the floor mat as they took him inside. My fiancé picked me up from the hospital and we headed back to the campsite. We ended up having to watch his dog and tried our best to have a normal evening. The man showed back up around 10:30 p.m. with 18 stitches. The doctor had told him that if we hadn't been there, or if we had awaited an ambulance, he would have bled out and died. It was a horrifying situation, but we saved a man's life. I was camping in Northeast Ohio by myself. It was the third and final night there. I woke up to relieve myself, walked about 10 feet from my hammock, and noticed a headlamp about 80 to 100 feet from me. I watched it for about 10 minutes, observing the person stand up and sit down. I put on my boots, grabbed my hatchet, and started walking to the right of my campsite. I intended to find out what he was up to. When I was about 50 yards from my site, I started walking towards him and noticed another headlamp, about 40 feet from me, also walking around. I hit the ground and threw some leaves on myself. The person walked about 10 feet from where I was laying. They stopped, lit a cigarette, and finished his beer. After he moved far enough away that he couldn't hear me, I got up and started walking towards the first guy. I got close enough to hear his phone receiving messages. Silently, I moved even closer to him and saw his face lit up from his cell phone when he stood up and started walking towards my hammock. I lay there on the ground for a minute and made my way toward my site. I stopped when I started hearing my tarp, which I had above my hammock, being trashed. Then I saw flashlights and my big flashlight turning on and off. I heard my mess kit being thrown and them talking about how he was just here. I lay on the ground and watched my flashlight walk away until it was a small, dim light. When the sun came up and I returned, my whole site was destroyed. My hammock and tarp were shredded, as if by a machete. My mess kit was stomped on, and they had taken my backpack, rain gear, and flashlight. I went to the spot where I saw the first guy and found chew pouches, 8 empty beer cans, and an empty lighter. I walked to where I saw the other guy and found an empty bag of powder. It turned out to be meth, a mess of cigarette butts, and a pile of feces with no toilet paper to be found. I dodged a major bullet that night, and I'm thankful to be alive. This past weekend, my partner and I decided to go to our usual camping spot. It's very low-key, usually with only 1 or 2 people up this mountain at a time. And even then, they're miles away from our campsite. It's not a well-known spot. This past weekend, just like every year, we brought my parents' little elderly dog. We set up camp, ate some food, and drank some beer around the campsite. Prior to this, we scoped out the area to see how busy it was. There was absolutely nobody in sight, and the entire mountain campgrounds were entirely empty. We're used to having at least one hunter or fisher in the area. We've never not seen at least one person the entire trip. So, we sat around the fire, completely relaxed with my little dog nearby. When we decided to get into bed, my usually very complacent and placid pup refused to settle inside the tent. It's pretty hot this time of year, so we had the tent unzipped with just the mesh covering the opening to let some breeze in. However, my pup was looking through the mesh and sniffing, zoning in on something entirely. We decided to get up and check out the camp for whatever he's looking at. We didn't see anything, so we decided to sit by the fire to tire us out, when my sleepy pup unsettled suddenly. He started growling a deep growl into one direction of the woods. We decided to grab the hunting knife and axe and listen. It was snarling and barking vigorously, which took us by surprise because he's been completely comfortable every other year. After a few minutes of him acting on high alert, we decided to flip the truck lights on to illuminate our camp, as we were surrounded by darkness. We listened intently, trying to figure out what he's seeing or hearing. He started growling like mad, and we made a run for the truck by how aggressively my dog was being. We waited, hearts pounding inside the truck, trying to see what's out there. After 30 minutes, we assumed whatever it was had passed on. After we repositioned ourselves in front of the fire again, my dog's hackles were up, and we heard the loudest tree branch snap a mere 10 feet away from us in the pitch-black wilderness. Again, we hopped in the truck with the dog and decided we better leave. Earlier that night, we were hearing wolves hunting for a few hours, and their howls echoing through the woods. Our main concern was it being a cougar, as they're commonly seen in this area, and there had been a lot of attacks on unsuspecting victims. We told my partner's parents that we decided it's better to be safe than sorry, and we were armed with very minimal weapons, nothing that would handle a mountain lion or a pack of wolves. We were called chicken shits the entire weekend and mocked over it. But whatever, we're alive, and that's all that matters. We still have no idea what was out in those woods. Years ago, my girlfriend and I, both teachers, would take a group of kids camping in June each year. We had a 12-person tent set up on our site, right next to a small lake, equipped with a picnic table and a fire ring. As part of the trip, we would tell campfire stories about the Jersey Devil, given that the campground was located in an area with many sightings over the years. The kids enjoyed being scared and eagerly anticipated returning the following year. This incident occurred around the 5th annual trip, and up to that point, nothing unusual had happened. On the last night, after telling stories and ensuring the kids were safely asleep, my girlfriend and I sat by the campfire in beach chairs. We had just bought a new puppy, and she was tied to the tent on a long leash so she could roam around. Suddenly, the logs in the fire collapsed, and the light from the fire dimmed considerably. Our propane torch on the picnic table dimmed at the same time, casting an almost pitch-black darkness. That's when our puppy began to growl. She was right next to me, and every hair on her back stood straight up as she stared into the darkness. Suddenly, from out of the water, a large figure emerged, about 20 yards from our site. Initially, I thought it was a person, but then it bent over and started running on all fours. I could only see the outline of the creature, and the back end was higher than the front. It wasn't a bear, a dog, or a deer. It looked and ran like something I had never seen. It trotted by and into the woods near our site, displaying no urgency. I jumped up, ran to my car, and turned on the lights. The car lights illuminated our campsite, but there was no sign of anything out of the ordinary. I urged my girlfriend to wake the kids because I wanted to leave. She, being the braver one, convinced me to stay. Eventually, we calmed down and turned in for the night. I laid down by the tent opening with a large butcher knife and did not sleep until the sun came up. Nothing like this has ever happened to me before or since, but I swear I saw something that was neither a man nor an animal. I haven't been camping since. Right after graduating high school, 3 friends and I decided to hike the Appalachian Trail from central West Pennsylvania to New Jersey. Out in the middle of the wilderness, miles from the nearest shelter, A weather-worn man with dirty, shoulder-length hair came rushing out of the brush onto the trail in front of us. His outfit was mismatched hiking gear, and up close, it was clear he had seen hard times. Though he was young, his hands were scarred and his skin was pockmarked. And around his waist, I kid you not, he had a machete tied to his belt. This fine gentleman introduced himself by the moniker Lone Wolf and claimed he was a lost through hiker hiking the trails. The fact that he had no backpack, however, was odd. But being really stupid 18-year-olds, with that sense of invincible energy common to that age, we didn't immediately get the hell away from him. He was weirdly charming, and we were kind of amused in a perverse way. We figured he'd leave us be if we were friendly, so we offered him some cigarettes. As he was smoking, he started staring at my friend Gwen with weird looks and making uncomfortable conversation directed at her, and only her. So we took off pretty quickly and hoped that would be the last we'd see of him. Nope. 2 hours later, we broke for a rest on a tall rock, and to our shock, we saw Lone Wolf, machete in tow, sneaking along in the brush next to the trail. We immediately doubled our pace, hoping to lose the guy, but he managed to follow us all day. With each passing hour, we realized beyond any doubt that he was following us, and our pace became more and more urgent. By nightfall, we lost track of the drifter, but we were jumping at every snapped twig and moving shadow. Hours passed, and we didn't see anyone, so we decided to build a fire. No one could sleep. Throughout the evening, we heard the periodic sound of brush and twigs breaking beyond the firelight. Half panicking, I called out to the darkness. "Hello?" The noises suddenly stopped, and I felt the sinking dread of full panic chilling my blood. I drew my utility knife, sweaty palms shaking. "We've got a gun," my friend shouted. This was a lie. He reached into his bag, pulling the handle of a camping frying pan out, which in the dark looked vaguely gun-like. He waved it around in the firelight. There was a sudden rapid crunching of leaves, and the more distant sound of twigs breaking. Then, silence. The next day, a local ranger approached us as we were approaching the next shelter and asked if we'd seen a man matching Lone Wolf's description. Apparently, someone had been attacked, beaten, and robbed nearby. The ranger phoned the sheriff about our story and told us they'd look for the guy. The ranger saw we were shaken and was nice enough to give us a ride up a fire trail a few miles so we could get out of the area. I still shudder, thinking about what that guy would have done had we not scared him off.